Rio is a random loser who gets isekai'd by Truck-kun into a fantasy world where he receives water powers and becomes the strongest, even though he just wants to live a relaxed, chill life. A boy, Rio finds himself in a weird place where an angel informs him that he has sadly passed away in an accident, so Rio inwardly decides to call him Fake Michael. Rio asks what he should do once he's reincarnated, so Michael says he hasn't been informed of a big quest or mission for Rio so he can live however he wants. Rio says he wants to live a slow life, so Michael explains that he will be reincarnated in a world called Phi and will be compatible with the water element. He says they will give Rio a small ice house, 2 months of food, a monster guidebook, and the power to use water magic. When Rio tries it out, he easily creates a ball of water without needing to chant, but he isn't able to make hot water. Instead, he creates a magnifying glass from ice, uses sunlight to start a fire, and manages to make a warm bath. From then on, Rio trains every day. He practices water and ice spells, and when his food starts running out, he goes into the forest to hunt. He manages to kill a boar, but learns that it's the weakest creature in the forest. Later, he runs into an assassin hawk and initially gets overwhelmed, but he manages to drive it away. Later, Rio finds a glowing lake and finds a Dullahan. After exercising for a few days, Rio spars with the Dullahan and slowly gets stronger. The Dullahan eventually gifts him a sword infused with water magic before disappearing. A few weeks later, the hawk from before attacks Rio again, but he eventually manages to defeat it with the skills he learned from training with the Dullahan. Suddenly, a huge dragon appears and asks him about the hawk, so Rio nervously admits he killed it, which impresses the dragon. It recognizes his sword as the Fairy King's blade, and the two spend talk for a while. Meanwhile, in heaven, Michael checks Rio's reincarnation records and is surprised to see that he has a hidden trait. He mutters that no one's had one of those since the girl he first sent to another world, which happened over 10,000 years ago, and reveals that Rio's hidden trait is eternal youth. While gathering salt at the beach, Rio finds a wrecked ship washed ashore, so he hurriedly looks for survivors and finds a man. Later, the man, Abel, wakes up in Rio's cabin and explains that his ship was destroyed by a giant sea monster during a storm. He's surprised by Rio's clothes and personality, but thanks him for saving his life. Abel admits that the rest of the crew were smugglers, so he isn't too upset about their deaths. When Rio offers him food, he casually uses water magic, which amazes Abel, since most people can't control more than one spell at a time. After eating, Abel asks Rio to take him back to the wreck because he needs to find something. They travel together, with Abel insisting he'll handle any monsters. When they arrive, they see that the other bodies are gone and Abel's item is missing. Realizing he needs to return to the nearest town, Loon, he invites Rio to come along, so Rio agrees but says he has to take care of something first. That night, he meets the Dullahan for one last training match, and even though he's still weaker, Rio manages to hold his own, and the Dullahan gives him a robe. The next morning, Rio and Abel set out on their journey. Along the way, a boar attacks them, but Abel easily defeats it with his total impalement sword technique. Later, in a swamp full of lizardmen, Rio wipes them all out with his ice spears, shocking Abel, who says he didn't know anyone could cast so many spells at once. As they continue, they face rock golems that heal themselves after being struck, and Abel's sword attacks don't work on them, so Rio crushes them with huge ice blocks. Inside one golem, they find a large magic stone, and while they're resting, Abel explains that golems are often found in dungeons, which gets Rio excited since Loon has the only dungeon nearby. Abel also tells him about dwarves, strong craftsmen who live with humans, and elves who live in forests. They head north, and Rio follows the directions he got from the dragon. Suddenly, a griffin appears, and they distract it with meat to escape. A while later, a pack of wyverns attacks them, but Rio defeats them all with ice magic, after which they cross the mountains. Rio and Abel continue their journey and find a narrow road leading north, so they follow it toward the nearest town. Abel tells him about Kailati, a place known for its food, and Rio gets excited about finally sleeping in a real bed and eating a proper meal. In Kailati, Abel explains how adventurer guilds work. They provide ID, travel permits, and trading rights. Rio likes the idea, especially since Abel paid his gate fee earlier, and he starts thinking about learning alchemy to use monster loot. At a restaurant, he's surprised to find curry on the menu and happily orders multiple servings. They soon reach Loon, where the guards cheer to see Abel alive. Abel tells them Rio saved him, and they head to the Adventurers Guild, where Abel recommends Rio for rank D, surprising everyone since his famous group, the Crimson Sword, has never promoted anyone before. The guild master Hugh arrives, shocked that Abel survived, and agrees Rio deserves the promotion. Abel's teammates, Lynn, Warren, and Rhea, suddenly rush in to greet him, so Abel apologizes for worrying them and insists Rio is the one they should thank. While Abel catches up with his friends, Hugh takes Rio aside and explains that the Crimson Sword is the strongest party in the city, and Abel's disappearance made them all worry. Rio finishes his registration with Nena, the receptionist, who signs him up for a beginner dungeon course and gives him a temporary room and a guild card. Later, Abel helps Rio sell their stones, buy new clothes, and pick out a proper staff. Rio doesn't see the point since he usually fights with his sword, but Abel jokes that his weapon is more like a knife. As they're wandering around, Rio learns this world's days and months are similar to Earth's, so he wonders if someone from Earth lived here. That night, they celebrate Abel's return with a big party, and the next day, Nina introduces Rio to his roommates, Niels, Ito, and Aman, a young girl who recently lost her parents. Meanwhile, Abel's team discusses Rio's powers and worry if he could side with the Empire and turn against them. However, Abel doesn't believe that will happen. Rio and his friends begin a special training course on exploring Deus, the labyrinths beneath the city. Their instructor gives a quick overview before leading them into a real dais for hands-on practice. The teacher asks if they have any questions, so Rio asks about fast travel between cleared levels, surprising him. The instructor explains that only southern Deus have that feature, Lawn cities don't. And Aman asks what fast travel even means, so Rio hurriedly says he had just heard about it somewhere. They reach Lawn City's Deus, which is famous for doubling its monster population each year. The instructor assures them the walls prevent anything from escaping most of the time, and the first floor looks peaceful, but Rio stays on guard and tells Aman not to wander. When they sense something moving, Rio instantly freezes a giant soldier ant, and Aman finishes it with one attack before they collect a magic stone. Later that day, back at the dorm, Niels asks for wine, but Ito reminds him that alcohol's forbidden for adventurers. The group celebrates Rio and Aman's successful first mission, and Rio compliments Aman's swordsmanship, so they plan to head to the dais again. Still, Rio can't shake the feeling that something's off since soldier ants aren't supposed to appear on the first floor. Abel suddenly arrives and reveals that the ants tunneled upward. He introduces himself to Rio's roommates, and a while later, Abel's team arrives and drags him off to report to the guildmaster. Before leaving, Rhea gives Rio a concerned look and scans his magic. The next day, Rio and Aman return to the Deus and battle wolf-like monsters. Rio's ice magic saves Aman several times, and Rio tells him to work on stamina training like Abel and not be such a useless loser. Later, while Rio is studying alchemy, he's suddenly attacked by a girl and they start fighting during an eclipse. However, as the eclipse ends, she reveals herself as Leonor and sees that he knows she's one of the Akuma. She warns him they'll face each other again whether he likes it or not, and tells him to not let anyone else kill him for now since he belongs to her. He returns to the library and is surprised to see his friends being bullied, so he effortlessly takes the bullies down, after which they all go take a relaxing bath. The next day, Ito, Aman, and Niels return to the dungeon and defeat a goblin archer on the 5th floor, but they realize that kind of monster shouldn't appear so early and decide to head back. Outside the city, Rio remembers his fight with Leonor and thinks about how her wind magic and speed exposed his weakness, so he tries to use water jets to boost his own movement. However, it doesn't work, so he decides to focus on studying alchemy and demons instead. In the city, Lynn searches through forbidden books to find anything about Rio's giant ice spell, but doesn't find anything, so it's probably an original creation. She's skeptical until the elf girl Sarah appears and offers to help after finishing her errands. At the guild, Ito's team reports the goblin sighting, and Nina rushes to inform the guild master since goblin archers aren't supposed to appear before the 10th floor, which might mean a tidal bore, a rare monster outbreak that hasn't happened in a decade. The guildmaster immediately summons Abel's Crimson Sword and Phelps's White Brigade to investigate, and they both agree to take the job. The next morning, both parties assemble at the dungeon, and Abel asks Rhea to scan ahead using wind magic, and she senses over 100 monsters right at the entrance, so the tidal bore has already begun. The guild declares an emergency and calls every available adventurer to fight as the battle begins. The injured fighters are pulled back for healing, while others rush forward to replace them, and Abel and Phelps hold the front lines, saving their mana as the endless horde keeps coming and wrecking them up. Reinforcements arrive when Niels and other adventurers bring more arrows and a message from the guildmaster. Once the goblins thin out, the elite teams will face the boss. When most of the monsters are defeated, the guildmaster gives the signal so Crimson Sword and White Brigade jump into the fight, cutting down the remaining goblins until 3 goblin generals appear. This confirms the presence of a goblin king, so Abel and Phelps each take on one, but suddenly a powerful wind slash kills all 3 generals as they see that the king has appeared. Phelps is quickly overpowered, but Abel attacks the king with his perfect shadow move and lands a deep strike before Lynn fires a huge wind bullet, finishing off the Goblin King and ending the title boar. After the dungeon battle, the adventurers head back to the guild for a party, while the guild master wishes he could be drinking and mutters that he has to write reports for the capital and regional lord. Requests for great title boar response funds on top of the fact that researchers from the royal capital are bound to show up, wanting to study what happened. Abel tells Rio about the fight, while Lynn corners him, curious about his long-range ice magic. Rio casually admits he can create thick ice walls 40 meters away without using proper incantations. Shocking Lynn. Abel laughingly reveals that Rio only chants because he thinks it sounds cool, but before Lynn can prod further, Rio hurries off to get the last plate of food to save himself from her. The next morning, Niels, Eamon, and Ito find the job board completely empty and learn that the dungeon's closed for inspection, and most quests are suspended. When Rio arrives, he offers them work searching for magic copper ore and promises 4 gold coins up front and 25 more per piece they find, so the three instantly accept. Outside, Rio sees Dan defending a girl from a group of knights. As their captain raises his sword to attack, he suddenly trips and keeps tripping every time he tries to stand, thanks to Rio's invisible magic before Phelps angrily appears. When they try to intimidate him, he declares that he is the son of former Royal Knight Captain Alexis Heimline, hearing which the knights instantly back down and retreat, and Phelps silently thanks Rio. Later that night, Abel meets Rio at a tavern and says he's worried about how knights are causing trouble again in the Pleasure District. They go to investigate but are attacked by cloaked men, so Rio swiftly freezes them while the knights try to ambush Phelps, but fall into his trap, where his ally Shenna incinerates them. The next day, the researchers arrive and seize the city's supplies and force the guildmaster Hugh to reopen the dungeon, so Hugh reluctantly agrees on the condition that any disaster will be the head, Clive's responsibility. A while later, the research team is exploring the 7th floor when they discover a strange black square. They get ready to gauge the mana density behind the gate but unexpectedly disappear. The team is suddenly transported to a weird empty space, so Clive immediately orders his team to start collecting data since he believes this accident could finally prove the theory that tidal boar monsters come from the 38th floor. He remarks that this will be an excellent finding, and with what they uncover on this investigation, he will build the scaffolding for his ascent to department head. On the surface, Natalie's group suddenly picks up a short signal showing the expedition team's location and sees that they're on the 40th floor, an area far beyond anyone's reach. A scholar, Christopher from the College of Magic, confirms that he saw the group vanish right as they entered the dungeon. They realize the first expedition was teleported deep underground, and Abel's party is among them, so they have to rescue them. Natalie remembers how Abel told her to go to Rio in case of an emergency and rushes off to search for him. At the guild, Nina bursts into Hugh's office with the news that the entire expedition has disappeared, so Hugh quickly orders her to keep it secret to avoid people panicking. Meanwhile, Rio is in the library trying to study tidal boars before Sarah joins him and shares what she's discovered. Tidal boars always happen close to eclipses, and the monster's clear magic stones prove they're newly created, not wanderers from deeper levels. Surprised, Rio follows her to inspect ancient records that might confirm the pattern. Meanwhile, Arthur suspects the team is inside a magical barrier that cuts them off from the surface, and when Rhea scouts ahead, she senses a group of humans and several unidentified presences. However, before they can investigate, Clive's team is ambushed by demons, creatures thought to exist only in legends, and they get overwhelmed until Abel's party arrives to help. However, even with their combined efforts, the strongest demon, the Demon Prince, is too powerful, and just as Abel is about to defeat it, Rio suddenly appears like a Giga Chad. Abel warns him not to fight the Demon Prince, but Rio doesn't understand how something so weak could be akin to a demon lord. He effortlessly takes down the 2 demons behind it and smilingly takes out his sword, saying they should get this over with now. Natalie hurriedly searches the city for Rio and informs that Abel's team is trapped in the dungeon, so he swiftly creates an ice cart, grabs her, and races toward the dungeon entrance. When they arrive, Natalie explains that Abel once told her to find Rio in any emergency, surprising Rio, who jumps straight into the dungeon, sealing the guards behind walls of ice and blasting down through the floors with water jets. Far below, Abel's party is struggling against the Demon Prince when Rio bursts in. He slices off the demon's head in a single swing, but it unexpectedly reattaches itself, so Rio summons hundreds of water jets and tears the monster apart until nothing remains. Abel thanks him, but Rio just smirks and jokes that Abel can repay him with dinner. Arthur, An advisor from the Bureau of Magicians thanks him as well, saying they'd all be dead without Rio, but he says he only did what anyone should, though he regrets not arriving sooner to save more people. As they recover the fallen, Abel asks Rio to help collect the demon's magic stones to support the victims' families. Rio agrees, but he notices the strange barrier that once surrounded the floor has disappeared, replaced by a weird magical presence near the staircase. So Arthur investigates and finds a mysterious gem which he plans to study later. Meanwhile, the hero's party accidentally summons Leonore, mistaking her for the demon lord, so she swiftly defeats them. She decides to spare their lives and casually mentions that she once fought a human named Rio, who's much stronger than their hero. Back on the surface, the survivors return safely, and Hugh organizes care for the wounded, while Arthur advises him to keep Rio's powers secret from politicians. Later, Sarah challenges Rio to spar, and is surprised when he matches her speed without magic. Later, Hugh assigns Rio a punishment for breaking dungeon rules, an escort mission to Whitnash City. The next morning, Niels approaches Rio with a request. His hometown, Abali, has issued a monster hunt for D-rank adventurers or higher. Since he can't take it on alone, he asks Rio to join him. Rio isn't initially interested, but when he hears the targets are goblins and skeletons, he immediately agrees since it sounds like the perfect chance to bully some weak mobs. Hugh approves the request, but warns them that two parties already failed the mission not because of the monsters, but because the villagers refuse to cooperate, but they aren't worried about that and set out and reach Cat by evening. The villagers greet Niels warmly, which surprises Rio, and they soon meet the mayor, Bulan, who explains that skeletons have started appearing near the eastern forest because the last adventurers broke a village taboo by fighting there, spilling blood in a sacred area. Niels explains that the forest holds secrets, but they have to get the elders' permission first before sharing them. When he returns, he reveals that the forest is protected by a guardian beast, and there's a sacred shrine deep within it. They meet the guardian, and Kusin and Rio is surprised to see that it's a Fenrir, but it's not corrupted. And Kusin explains that 30 skeletons have gathered near the shrine, including a massive one sealed inside. The team easily defeats the smaller ones before facing the giant skeleton. Using Rio's ice magic, Eamon and Niels swiftly destroy it. Inside the shrine, they find a cracked gemstone embedded in the earth goddess's statue, leaking dark energy. The source of the monsters, so Nasu, the village elder, seals it and thanks them for saving Cat. On their way back, Niels and Ito realize their one-year adventurer anniversary is near and decide to buy a house, inviting Rio and Amon to move in, so Amon agrees and Rio decides to think about it. Meanwhile, Hugh assigns Abel to represent the guild at the upcoming Whitnash Open Port Festival, where the Empire's mage commander and her lieutenant, the Inferno Magician, will also attend. As Rio is about to leave for Whitnash, he sees that Niels, Addo, and Amon are assigned to escort the same merchant. When they reach Whitnash, the merchant thanks them and explains he'll be staying 10 days before needing an escort home, so until then, they're free to do as they please. The next morning, the Imperial convoy arrives, but things are delayed because one noble forgot his travel documents. While waiting, the mage Oscar discusses their real mission with Durjan. Officially, they're attending the festival, but Oscar suspects the Emperor is using the event to quietly deal with nobles opposing the crown, and his personal task is to guard Princess Fiona. That night, Fiona attends a banquet with her brother, Prince Conrad, and quickly excuses herself, complaining about how much she hates formal events. Her maid Marie reminds her that despite her dislike for politics, Fiona is still one of the Empire's strongest fighters and magicians. The next day, Rio and his friends explore the festival and spot Abel sitting stiffly beside Fiona in the guest seats. Sarah explains that Abel is filling in for Guildmaster Hugh until he arrives. Nearby, Rhea senses a powerful wind barrier protecting the royals, powered by a rare magical device. Fiona, who leads the Empire's magic division, is accompanied by her lieutenant, the Inferno magician, Oscar. Rhea warns Rio to stay away from him, but Rio accidentally bumps into Oscar in the street. Oscar immediately senses something unusual about him, but lets it slide, and later, he and Jurgen bring festival food to Fiona, who insists on calling him Master, annoying him. Meanwhile in Lune, Sarah looks for Rio but learns he's away for a week, and that night in Whitnash, the barrier suddenly comes down and they're attacked. In a flashback, Oscar works as an apprentice to a blacksmith and heads back to his house. The blacksmith says he wants to gift Oscar a sword especially for him. Later, the village has a feast, and Oscar's father learns that a bandit group has been sighted near the village, so he says they have no choice but to fight them. Oscar's father tells Oscar and his wife to hide at their house. The villagers try fighting against the bandits, but they're overpowered. The bandit leader breaks in and effortlessly kills Oscar's mother right in front of him, so he angrily tries to fight back but is quickly defeated. Shocked, his father tries to fight the leader but gets killed too, and the bandits decide to retreat since a pack of wolves are being drawn to the scent of blood. The blacksmith hurriedly arrives and tries to escape with Oscar, but they aren't able to get out, so he sacrifices himself to hold off the wolves, while Oscar escapes and falls into a river. Later, he wakes up in a bed in front of Luke, who tells him his red hair was a blessing from the fire god and urges him to study magic. Determined to become stronger, Oscar trains for years. However, one day, he shockingly sees that the manor is on fire and rushes in to see the bandit from before. Boscona has killed Luke. Oscar manages to wound him but gets stabbed and collapses, after which his hair turns gray. Presently, as the banquet is under attack, Fiona hurriedly heals an injured Conrad and fires a distress flare, which Oscar sees and runs to help. He arrives just in time to see Fiona fall off a cliff, and as she's falling, she asks him to look after her brother. However, Oscar hurriedly rushes after her. Niels, Eamon, and Eto are eating ice cream when they suddenly see Fiona falling, and Niels rushes forward and manages to catch her, while Eto and Eamon swiftly take out the bandits that attack them. They decide to get Fiona somewhere safe first, since they can figure out what to do after that. But Oscar suddenly lands in front of them and angrily tells them to get away from her. Abel returns from his meeting with the Lord to find the mansion under attack. Conrad quickly explains the situation and urges him to check on Princess Fiona. On the beach, Oscar thinks Niels, Eto, and Aman are the bandits and swiftly attacks them. Eto barely manages to block the first blast with his sanctuary shield before Oscar orders them to back away from Fiona. When they refuse, he unleashes another powerful spell, injuring everyone. However, just as he's about to deliver the final bow, Rio suddenly appears and blocks his attack. He demands to know what's going on, but Oscar attacks again, forcing him to counter with his ice magic. Oscar soon realizes his flames are useless against Rio's power, and they continue fighting until Abel arrives and breaks it up, explaining that it's all a misunderstanding since Niels, Aman, and Eto are allies, not enemies. Oscar finally stops, but Rio, furious over his friend's injuries, still wants to finish him off. Abel warns that killing a high-ranking Imperial mage would cause a war between nations, and convinces him to stand down, so Rio tells him to take Fiona and Oscar away. The next morning, Abel tells Rio and the others that Oscar even apologized to them, so last night is being chalked up to a mutual understanding. Niels says he was worried they might take their adventuring licenses, and Rio is surprised to see that Oscar actually took responsibility. Abel informs them that there were a fair number of casualties at the garden party, which means there are definitely going to be diplomatic concerns in the future. He adds that Fiona wants to extend her thanks to Niels, Eto, and Eamon, and is even offering them a monetary reward since they saved her life and protect her from the raiders. They head back to Lune where Rio meets Sarah, and she brings him to the library to study together. Later, Rio buys a small farmhouse while Michael says Rio's path may seem like a complicated one since most people don't end up in such situations just because they've been reincarnated. The peaceful life he wanted will be the furthest thing for what's in store for him, so he hopes Rio survives the experience. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.